In this episode, I'm sharing the journey of finding my voice, what this process has entailed, and the steps that I've taken to find my voice.
Hello, and welcome to the Beautiful Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Johnson, a certified professional coach, mentor, writer, and speaker. I help professional women gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to pursue their bigger purpose and vision, so that they can have fulfillment and thrive in their careers. I believe there is beauty in our voices, beauty in our stories, and beauty in our journeys. There is power in community, connection, and deep, meaningful conversation, which is why me and my guests are here to share our stories, experiences, lessons, and learning to inspire you as you walk the path and step into your next level. We go deep, sharing beautiful reflections of what this personal growth journey looks like in real, living color. This journey of pursuing our purpose and vision as we continue to evolve. It is my mission to empower you to believe in your power, to embrace your own uniqueness, and to be the best version of you. I want to see you thrive purposefully. Now on to the episode for today.
Hello, and welcome to the Beautiful Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Johnson. In today's episode, I'm sharing the journey of finding my voice, what this process has entailed, and the steps that I've taken to find my voice. I was talking to my accountability partner, Kathy London, and she said, Katherine, you've come a long way with your communication. She remembered when we met each other like a few years ago, and she recalled how I was back then. And she brought it to my attention. So it got me thinking about just how far I've come with my communication on this journey of finding my voice. Also, I was a guest on another podcast, and I talked a lot about this journey of finding my voice and how I feel like this has been a big part of my life. I really feel like my biggest life lesson so far has been the journey of finding my voice. And I know that many women struggle with speaking up, being vulnerable, and sharing their true feelings because I struggle with these things myself. If you've heard any part of my story, you know by now that I was a very quiet, shy, and reserved girl growing up. In fact, I wore these labels like a badge of honor for a long time. It's how I always explained myself or described myself to others. And in fact, it was interesting because I can remember being at different social events and hanging out and things like that. And I was always the one that was labeled quiet. In fact, people would say, oh, she's having a good time. Leave her alone. She's just quiet, which was very true. In fact, I have so many stories that I could share with you about, how I was back then. In fact, I think I'll share a few of those with you. I can remember in third grade, my teacher name was Mrs. Keating, and she to date was one of my favorite teachers. I can remember in the class when she asked me to come up to the front of the room and to share my answers to an assignment that we had done. And I literally started to cry. I remember it like it was yesterday, but I also remember her coming to my desk, getting my hand and walking with me to the front of the classroom and helping me as I began to share my answers to an assignment that we had. But I was so terrified and so petrified that I literally cried the entire time. In fact, I was reminded of this very story when I got to high school by a young guy that I knew named Reggie. And he came up to me and he was like, is that you, Katherine? Is that you? He was like, oh my gosh. Like, I remember how quiet you were, how shy you were. And he's like, you remember Mrs. Keating class when you used to cry all the time every time she asked you to come to the front of the room and read your answers? I was like, yeah, I remember. But that was just how I was as a child. I'm not sure if it was just something that was just naturally a part of me or if it had something to do with my upbringing or anything like that. But I do know that I would avoid talking to people at all costs. I can remember even like as a teenager and going into becoming a young adult in my early adulthood years, I can remember going in stores and I would not want to talk to anybody. So instead of me asking the person that worked there where something was, I would go and walk all around the store. I would literally avoid having to talk to someone. That's how shy I was. But the crazy thing is that I actually enjoy having conversations. I was just at the same time afraid or scared to really talk to people. Another story is my military days. When I got to my first duty station, I was stationed in Bethesda, Maryland. When I got there, I was stationed there like a whole year before I really had any conversations with anyone. And some of the guys that I work with, they reminded me, they would say, they didn't remind me, but they said to me, this was after that year. And I actually started opening up and started talking more. They said to me, man, we remember when you first started here, we could barely get 3 words out of you. The most you would say is good morning. We would ask you how you were doing and you would say, I'm fine. And that was pretty much the extent of our conversation. But as I got comfortable with them and started to get to know them a little bit, of course, I started opening up and started sharing more of myself with them. And so we became like fast friends. And then I would just talk their ear off and, you know, they would say, man, but now we really can't get you to shut up. So those are just some examples of, you know, how quiet I was and how shy I really considered myself to be. I was really never one to speak up. Never one to raise my hand or to volunteer information or to really share my deeper feelings, like how I felt about things. So as a result of being this way, I always felt like no one really understood me or cared about my feelings. And I think that's a natural result that happens when you're always keeping everything in and you're really not giving people the opportunity to know you because you're not talking. So some say that, you know, over time, you know, this is just something that people grow out of, you know, as you get older, you just stop caring so much. And I think that's true to a certain degree. And I'm sure many of you can think of like that grandma or that friend that has like 0 filter and they've reached that point in their life where they just don't care and they're going to say what they have to say no matter what. I know I definitely have some family members and some friends that are like that. And maybe it is an age thing. So I think there is definitely some truth to that. But I also believe that the more you know who you are, the more you believe in yourself and the more confident you are, in my opinion, I think that allows you to really be yourself and to bring your full self. Like this has proven to be true in my life. Like the more I worked on how I felt about myself, the more I worked on improving my confidence, then the more I began to really show up and be able to show people who I was and use my voice and speak up in all of those things. But it really just takes time and work. So this journey of finding my voice started because I just reached a point where I knew I had things to say. I had contributions that I wanted to bring to the workplace. There was this part of me that was really screaming to be heard. And there was also a deeper desire to really share more of my authentic self. You know, minus the facade or this aura of perfection that I often put up, like, you know, I got everything together. I really wanted others to really see me and to get to know me and to know who I was at my core. And this journey was also coupled with the fact that I reached a point in my career where I really got tired of just being behind the scenes and not being able to express myself and not being able to communicate in a way where I felt like I was being heard and I felt like my value was being contributed. So I reached that point in my career and it became very clear that I had to begin to really find my voice and learn how to communicate effectively, learn how to show up, learn how to bring all of me into the workplace and not just into the workplace, but into my relationships and into everything that I wanted to do and was beginning to do in my life. So that's where this journey of finding my voice really began. And at the time, I didn't know it's what I was doing. I just started doing some things because I just really got frustrated. Like I no longer wanted to be like the quiet girl or the shy girl because I felt like I had things to say. I always had things to say. I enjoy conversations. And like I said, I really wanted to show up in a bigger way because I knew that there was this bigger part of me that was ready to be seen and she was ready to emerge. And I knew it was time. Like oftentimes we reach that point in life where we know it's just time for us to do something different. That was what happened to me. I just knew that it was time for me to do something different. So what exactly did I do? What did the journey really entail? So I'm going to share with you 5 things that I did. You know, I had to sit down and really think back to some of the things that I did, like in the beginning, like how did it all start? Because this has surely been a process that I've been on for the last maybe 4 or 5 years. And so I sat down and I thought about, okay, way back when, like what were some of the initial things that I did to find my voice and to really learn to speak up, to communicate, and to really be heard. So I thought back, and one of the first things, and I remember learning this at a conference that I went to, was I started to say no. And I know you may be thinking, that's it. That sounds so simple. Look, That's very hard for someone who is used to saying yes all the time. And I definitely was a people pleaser. I definitely was a type of person that was very much concerned about what other people thought about me. So saying no was a big deal, and it was hard. And in the beginning, I felt bad about saying no. Like, how could I say no? I felt like I was wrong. I felt like I was supposed to say yes. But at the same time, I knew that being this yes person and always thinking about other people ahead of myself didn't make me feel good. And I knew that in order for me to really begin to honor how I was feeling, I had to start with the simple thing of telling people no. And it was difficult at first. It was challenging. But the more I began to say no, just in an act of honoring my feelings and how I was feeling, the more I began to feel good. I began to feel good because I'm like, wow, I'm telling people no. And guess what? They're okay with it. They may get mad for a moment, or they may not like me for a moment, but they come around. So that was one of the first things that I began to do as an act of me really finding my voice. The second thing that I began to do was I began to journal and write. And journaling and writing served as a way for me just to unpack my feelings, to really understand like how I felt about certain things. I would sit in my journal and I would write about different scenarios or different stories or different things that happened. And I would just unpack it in my journal, how it made me feel, what I could do differently, what I really wanted to say. And in doing that process, it helped me when it came time for me to practice that. So it helped me when it came time for me to speak up in the office. Like if that incident would repeat itself or I found myself in that situation, having unpacked this in detail in my journal allowed me to actually say what I really wanted to say. Journaling and writing has been very transformative for me as a person that's very much in her head, very much analytical, and I process things in my head. Journaling and writing allows me to process things out on paper. And in processing it out on paper, I get it out of my head. I have more space and I'm clearer about what I feel and what I think on the matter. So it works, y'all. I'm telling you, it's something that it's been transformative in my life. And it's really helped me in the process of finding my voice. And number 3 is I kept challenging myself to do things that would stretch me. And this was a big one. Like I started going to networking events. I started my own meetup group. I started facilitating events, and I even joined a Toastmasters group to help me with my public speaking, which I was petrified of. I mean, literally petrified of. I would just go blank when it was time for me to stand up in front of a crowd and speak. I would literally go blank. Not to mention, I sweat profusely. So having to stand up in front of people added a whole nother degree of anxiety. So just imagine sweaty armpits. That's what it was. But I did this as a way to challenge myself. I'm always for a good challenge because it allows me to push myself and it takes me out of my comfort zone. And in doing these things, I was really putting myself in a position to improve my communication, to work on my communication, to have conversations and to talk to people. And I would challenge myself when I went to these network events, not to just go and sit in as far in the back as I could and not talk to anyone and wait for someone to come up to me, because that's what I would typically do in these type of situations. Instead, I would challenge myself by saying, okay, I'm going to this small networking event. I know it's not going to be hundreds of people. It'll probably be maybe 20 to 50 people. And I'm going to challenge myself to talk to 2 or 3 people just to introduce myself. The first time I did it was just to introduce myself and what I did. I started with something that was very comfortable, something that was very easy for me to talk about. So, hello, my name is Katherine Johnson. I'm a system engineer and I'm also a coach and a mentor. Boom. That was it. That's what it looked like in the beginning. And as I did that more and more, I started to add more about myself. And then the great thing about it is when you start to talk, people start to talk to you. And next thing you know, conversation begins to flow very easily. So those are some of the things that I did to really get more comfortable speaking to people in group settings and settings where I didn't really actually know everyone that was there. The 4th thing I did was I found communities where they created a safe space for me to share, connect with other like-minded women. And this really allowed me to see myself in other women through them sharing their stories and hearing their stories. And it made me feel more comfortable in the things that I had to say, knowing that we're all going through the same thing. We all have similar experiences. We may react or respond to it differently, or it may show up differently on our journeys. But at the end of the day, it's all very similar stuff. But in me putting myself in communities and being able to hear and talk to other women, it allowed me to recognize that, we were all the same and see myself in them through their stories. And to the same degree, it allowed me to be able to share my stories in these communities where it was women that looked like me. And I think this was important for me because it's very difficult for you to show up and stand up when you're in a room of people that look nothing like you, who may come from money or have a lot of money, who may be a completely different demographic, and you already feel out of place. It's very difficult for you to stand up in those environments as a quiet, shy person and speak up and share who you are and what you do. So I started in communities of people that looked like me, in communities where they created a safe and supportive environment for us to talk and share in a space that was non-judgmental, and people left their biases aside and everybody was there for a common reason. And that was very helpful on this journey of finding my voice because it allowed me to really get comfortable having conversations, sharing my story, sharing things about myself, and it really facilitated the process of me learning how to communicate better. The fifth thing that I did was I started to practice being vulnerable. And you may be thinking, what? Yeah, I started to practice being vulnerable, sharing things that I typically wouldn't share with people, like talking about my fears, my insecurities, and the things that I deem flaws. And what I noticed is that sharing vulnerability instantly connects people. Like when you share something about someone like, yeah, I'm having this challenge, or this is something that I struggle with, you realize that, wow, other people are challenged and struggling with the same thing. And then it actually opens the door for you to have deeper conversation and for you to connect at a deeper level. And this is what I found in sharing things that way back when I probably wouldn't share with anyone. Like, I'm not going to tell you that I'm challenged with, eating junk food and sweets and it's something that I'm working through. I probably wouldn't have shared that with someone 5 years ago because I considered that to be a bad thing. But in sharing these things, it's like you kind of release the hold it has over you by sharing. And that's something that I also did most recently at a virtual summit that I was selected as a speaker to speak at. I shared a very personal, vulnerable story about myself from my childhood. And the topic of my speech was centered around the importance of speaking up and sharing our story in order to release guilt, shame, and secrecy. And I had never shared this story publicly. I had talked about it with some of my family and my closest friends in therapy, but I had never shared it on such a big public space. And what I realized, which was the theme of the speech, is that even though I've worked through it and I've, released a lot of the shame and the guilt that I had around it and the secrecy that I had around it, even sharing it again in this manner, in this public space within this environment, it was something that was so freeing and so liberating about it. And I think any last remaining strings of guilt, shame, and secrecy that I carried around it was gone. It was like immediately released. It was no more. So that's something else that I have learned from practicing being vulnerable and sharing those things that we typically wouldn't share. I shared that story because I wanted other women who were in that situation to feel empowered and inspired. I shared that very vulnerable part of myself as a way to release any remaining shame, guilt, and secrecy that I carried from my childhood. So I know that practicing being vulnerable and really sharing those parts of yourself that you typically wouldn't share is really a key piece of finding your voice. Now, I'm not saying just go start telling your business to anyone. No, you have to start with people that you trust. I started with my therapist. She was the very first person that I talked about my childhood trauma and childhood abuse with, because it was a safe and supportive environment. And that really opened the door for me to do the deep work and the healing that I needed to do before I could actually talk about this thing openly and publicly. So I would suggest, of course, always therapy. But if you have a close friend, or if you have someone that you trust, or if you have someone that you know is really going to take to heart what you're saying and keep what you're saying between you two, and you feel like there's someone you can talk to, then I would suggest starting there. Don't go, especially these days on social media. And especially if it's something that you haven't really worked through completely yet, you want to make sure that you give yourself the time and space to really work through it, to make sure it's something that you've, resolved and something that you're comfortable speaking about before you just go telling everybody all your vulnerable business, because people will have things to say. And if you haven't worked through it, if you haven't got clear, and if you're not comfortable with where you are with it, and how you feel about it, then those things may still impact you. So those are 5 of the things that I did on my journey to really find my voice. And the one thing I want you to know is that this journey is never ending. It's one that I'm still on today. It continues, and that's what happens when we're constantly growing and evolve to take our life to the next level. It continues. As I grow and evolve, I'm constantly being stretched in new and different ways. So the journey of finding my voice continues. And I still have work to do. I still have some areas where I need to work at it a bit more, especially in my Toastmasters group when I'm giving speeches and things like that. But I can look back clearly, like my friend Kathy brought to my attention. I can look back and I can see the progress. I can see what has transpired over the last few years just by, committing to doing the work and committing to, doing what I have to do to improve it. And I think that the biggest thing is that I just decided that, I get to choose the labels that I wear, being quiet, shy, and reserved. I could keep broadcasting that to everyone and all over the place. And while those things may be true, I still get to choose how I show up. I get to choose how I share my story, when I share my story, and I get to choose to use my voice powerfully. And that's what finding your voice helps you to realize. And it helps you to get to the place where you feel comfortable speaking up. You feel comfortable sharing what's on your mind, sharing what's on your heart. And I always tell women and my clients that sometimes, it's not necessarily always for other people, your decision to speak up or to share. First and foremost, it should be for yourself. Like you should speak up when you have something to share and you have something to say and not feel like, your deeper feelings or your deeper concerns should remain hidden and should remain inside of you. So I always say that using your voice powerfully and finding your voice first and foremost is for you. So I share this with you today to inspire you and to encourage you that if I can do this, so can you. Like if me, that 3rd grade little girl who was petrified of standing in front of the classroom, that military girl who didn't speak to anyone besides good morning and how are you? I'm fine for her first year tour of duty and didn't share anything about herself. No one knew anything about me. The girl who would walk into a store and walk all the way around the store looking for something when all she had to do was ask someone. The girl who, never really shared anything that she felt was a bad thing or showed her imperfection to anyone. If I can learn how to find my voice and to show up in a more authentic way and to bring myself fully, then you can too. And more importantly, like your next level will demand a bigger version of you. Your next level will demand a bigger version of you. Whether you're ready to take your career to the next level, you want to step into entrepreneurship, or you're just ready to do something that you've never done. Growth requires change, and it requires us to do something different if we want something different. So I want you to remember that, like, you have to do something different. And finding your voice is an exercise in doing something different to have what you want. And like anything, no, it's a process. It's a journey, but with time, effort, and consistency, you will see results. You look up one day and you reflect on where you were and where you are now, and you'll be amazed by how far you've come and how much you've grown. And it will be yet another beautiful reflection. Again, I hope that this has inspired you. I hope that it got you thinking about how you can show up in a bigger way, how you can bring yourself more powerfully into your workplace, into your career, into your relationships by finding your voice, honoring your feelings, saying how you feel, speaking up, sharing your unique story. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope that my journey of finding my voice has inspired you. Maybe you see yourself in my story, or certain aspects really resonate with you. As you look to find your voice, consider the steps that I took on my journey and how they could support you. Also, reflect upon the following questions to help you go deeper. How often do you speak up and share your true feelings? What do you really need to say? What stops you from speaking up or sharing? How does it leave you feeling? How can you begin the process of finding your voice? If you're enjoying the podcast, show some love by leaving a rating and a review. Also, be sure to share the podcast with someone you know. Connect with me on LinkedIn and Instagram at Katherine N Johnson. Also use the hashtag Katherine N Johnson or Beautiful Reflections Podcast on Instagram and share with me what you're learning or how the podcast is supporting you. Until next time.